Well, welcome to the No Show. We are back. My name's Andrea Edwards.
I'm Tim Wade.
And my name is Joe Augustin. Here's a show that's come back with a completely new idea, a new way of doing the show. And hopefully what we'll do is still leave you with lots to say, lots to think about, and lots to share with people about the world you live in.
Yeah. So we're committing to an hour, and no one believes we can do it, especially my husband. But we're determined,
And me.
right?
I've got $20 on us going at least an hour and a half, really.
Oh, we got to do it. We've got to do it. So who wants to explain the new structure? Tim, do you want to?
Okay, so new format is this. We're gonna get down to this. It'll start with a quick roundup of a lot of great things happening, or well, not great things, great stories around the world. And while Tim mimes me, it'll then continue into a bit of a conversation about some of the more important things that we should be talking about as well. So with all that said, let's get down to it. We're going to talk about the main stories.
Yep.
Hey, right. Just quickly. So if you only have 10 minutes, first 10 minutes, you're going to get the top line news items to give you some ideas for thinking, and some links we'll be sharing in the comments areas as well. So you can also follow up on those articles too.
Yeah. And then we're going to go into the top 5. So if there's a big story going on in the world and you don't hear it straight away, it's not because we're ignoring it. It's because we're going to spend more time on it. So.
Yeah.
With all that said, ladies first. Go ahead, Andrea.
Ladies first. All right. So we're going to kick off with some good news, as far as I'm concerned anyway. Sarah Palin. I don't know if you guys remember Sarah. She loses her comeback bid in Alaska, and a lady called Mary Potola, sorry if I'm saying her name wrong, she won, and she's the first Alaskan native elected into Congress, and also the first woman. So I thought that was really amazing news. Gorbachev passed away this week, and honestly, I hadn't seen the pizza ad before, and I kind of felt a little bit sad watching it, but here we go. Anyway, he's left a legacy that's kind of interesting. Arnold Schwarzenegger has been praising him. Many other are not, and Putin has said he won't even attend his funeral. So mixed sort of history. Ukraine, obviously that is not going away, and we are hitting the point of maybe people being a little bit bored. There's a lot of conversations going on around this, and I've been following some military experts on Twitter over the last 6-7 months, so just really tracking what they've been saying and what they've been predicting. And one of the things is that Ukraine is displaying such great strategic insight in the war and the way they're carrying out the war, that because of that, the West is providing them more and more advanced weapons because they know the weapons won't be wasted. And that is potentially going to be helping them in this current stage of the war, which we're starting to see now. And this is also happening at the times when Russia's supplies are potentially dwindling. So it obviously continues to be an intense war. The nuclear risk is constant, and we've had one recently. As Zelensky said, the world didn't know how close they were to destruction. And there's a United Nations group visiting this nuclear reactor as we speak, under fire. But is it going in Ukraine's direction? So Quentin Somerville, who's one of my favourite BBC journalists, posted an article, said, is this Ukraine's breakthrough moment? There's a powerful piece in the New York Times as well, just talking about what it's like as a civilian. And the most important thing and the most important message that keeps coming through is Ukraine has to win this war. They can't concede, they can't negotiate. And of course, that's a hard thing to do. But there's a great article called A Letter from a Russian Friend, and I really recommend everyone picks that one up. So another big breaking piece is in China. The United Nations has accused China of crimes against humanity. They didn't want this report released, and they put a lot of pressure on the United Nations to make sure it wasn't released. It's out, so there's going to be a lot of backlash there. And then in my last weekend reads, I shared a story that Macron warns of the end of abundance as France faces a difficult winter. The initial reaction was that he was out of touch with the poorer people in France. But actually this week, I've seen that the bigger, deeper message has been heard. The age of abundance is over, and we have to simplify our lives if we have any chance of dealing with the climate emergency. So it's a very powerful statement for a world leader to make at this time, and a necessary statement. Tim?
All right, another news, a sad outcome. Time has run out. The UN fails to reach an agreement to protect marine life. That's from the United Nations, and it's covered in The Guardian. Also, Crikey is taking on the Murdoch family and media. There's Crikey Lachlan Murdoch legal battle erupts amid publication subscriber push. That's in the Sydney Morning Herald. A lot's also going on in the Donald Trump case, and lots of different angles are being shared, including the fact that it's not a big deal. Judge orders redacted affidavit used in Trump search warrant to be unsealed. That's in the New York Times. Also, Trump appears to concede he illegally retained official documents. That's in The Guardian. That's a crazy story. Check it out. We're going to put these in the links. Opinion. What the redacted affidavit shows in the Trump Mar-a-Lago case. That's also in the New York Times. And then today, after the photo of the documents taken from Mar-a-Lago was released, a great piece in The Atlantic, how the Department of Justice used Trump's methods against him. That's in The Atlantic. Definitely check out The Atlantic. They're pushing out extensive coverage on this and other issues impacting America. Another article recommended is Fear of Fascism. That's also in The Atlantic. I think the bigger picture for all of this coverage is probably this. Republicans thought they had the midterms in the bag. Voters just rejected them again. That's Lloyd Green writing in the Guardian. And this is down to two things: the reversal of the right to abortion, and people absolutely horrified that the leader of the country, or the past leader of the country, has betrayed the USA. If you haven't seen it, a big part of what is going on is record number of women have registered to vote, and it looks like the surge is for the Democrats. So potentially good news if you don't want to see Trump or someone like him in power again. But it's definitely an interesting story to keep an eye on. Joe?
Well, across the pond, the UK is literally surrounded by a ring of human excrement. Well, to be fair, there'd probably be a few dogs and cats involved in that as well, but it's something that can literally be seen from space. It was one of those things that a Chinese astronaut saw when he looked down upon the British Isles, and it looked kind of like a jade ring, which was interesting. This is all, of course, because of Brexit and the change of rules and regulations that now, unfortunately, make it easier for companies to pollute. And one of the comments I love on this particular story was how on a calm day with a hot sun, the surface of the, as they say, enchanted English Channel itself could harden and allow migrants in their millions to simply walk across into Britain. There's a huge bike protest over in Germany, some 8,500 cyclists out in protest. That's going to be a nice traffic situation. A story from Yemen where the war has had lots and lots of victims not engaged in the war itself. One of the stories there is someone who's basically been robbed of their children. That story's in The Guardian. Emily Maitlis in the UK speaks of an active Tory party agent that's been shaping the BBC News output. This is in The Guardian. And this agent is referred to is Sir Robbie Gibb, someone appointed to the BBC's board by Boris Johnson's government, and who has since influenced a series of ongoing reviews of the broadcaster's editorial output. As you know, the BBC used to be famously impartial, and now famously not so much. He was not definitely an impartial party. Previously worked as Theresa May's Director of Communications and actually helped found the right-wing GB News channel. It's part of a bigger story about media accountability around the world. I mean, it's long overdue. We have to look at ourselves, look at media, and everyone's going to ask themselves, what are they consuming and who are they trusting? There's also some news coming out of Malaysia, and this is interesting for me because I just came back from a trip from there. The big headlines is Najib finally goes to jail, and so does his wife. In spite of itself, Malaysia has managed to send someone away for corruption at a high level. One of the great little blurbs from the reportage is Rosmah Mansor, who's the wife of Najib, was also going to jail, paying a fine of several hundreds of millions of ringgit. She's asked the court for compassion as a, quote, woman taking over a man's role in the house, unquote, which apparently also includes taking money. Sticking with greed, a report in Time magazine says America's 1% has taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90%. It's probably no surprise to you that America is currently in the lead by quite a bit in the Gini index, which measures the difference in terms of who has more money, of the gap between the people who have money and people who don't. Of course, during the time that we were away, big news in Singapore for a lot of people was the announcement that there will be the repeal of 377A, which is basically the legalization, or at least the de-legalization of gay sex. This, of course, has led to all kinds of very interesting conversations. There were all kinds of gatherings by people trying to protect their various interests, or some would say, overreach into situations. And in contrast, India's top court has declared same-sex couples entitled to social benefits, deserving legal protections. Now, to be clear, it's not that they were saying that gay couples were being protected by it, but they were actually protecting the rights of non-traditional families. And this is in contrast to what has been spoken about in Singapore, because along with the announcement of the legalization or the repeal of 377A was the announcement that the government would also make moves to alter the constitution to not provide the same access to those social benefits that India has just become famous for as well. You may have also heard about Joseph Schooling, the Singapore Olympian who has done the country proud, and most recently, somewhat not so much. This depends, of course, on your perspective on the matter. He set up a firestorm because he confessed to the use of marijuana. And this was after coming back from, I think, the SEA Games, and apparently he passed the test, and people were curious about why he would confess to it. Not much is said about that, but all I'm going to say is, yes, you can pass one test, but you might not pass all the tests. That's all I'm saying. Andrea, back to you.
Yeah, I think people don't really understand the Singapore sort of viewpoint on marijuana and its use. So it's an interesting story, especially from when you understand the Singapore perspective. Okay, if you're in the watch trading market, and I know many people who are, and I know the majority of people have no idea what I'm talking about, but basically people have been buying up Rolexes and all sorts of other watches for years and years and years, and keeping them and selling them, and the second-hand market is crazy for them. But not anymore. The Chinese are selling them off, as well as their, what is it, Hermes, Birkin bags. Hermes, sorry, darling. And basically, yeah, the price is just dropping in the market. So keep hold of your watch if you want to make some money, if you can. John Oliver released a video where he's talking about net zero. And he's basically made the claim we cannot offset our way out of climate change. It's a really, really powerful video. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, he really goes into the details of it. And there's so many scams, which of course makes people less inclined to want to do it. But the story has also been getting picked up by a lot of media, which doesn't normally happen with his skits. But a serious conversation started. So I thought that was a really good thing. In China, sad story, the Dugong, which was the inspiration for the mermaid tales, is now officially extinct. There are dugongs in other parts of the world, but in China, that's now official. Tim?
Well, we have a rare triple dip, La Nina. La Nina alert issued as meteorologists warn of potent spring-summer weather for Australia. That's on 7 News. What the rare triple dip La Nina could mean for winter, that's on msn.com. So basically we're looking at the end of this year. And so in Southern Hemisphere, obviously that's spring, summer. It's going to be quite interesting. And in the Northern Hemisphere, that's over their winter. Australia's East Coast set for third straight La Nina season, experts predict. That's on ABC News at the ampproject.org. Please understand what this means for all of us. More of the same extremes that we've been seeing. And so it's not just like a one-off. I'm sure we're all noticing this now. It's just not a one-off anymore. These things are happening regularly. There's an interesting legal case for the fossil fuel industry. U.S. fossil fuel firm sues insurer for refusing to cover climate lawsuit. And that's covered under climate crisis section of The Guardian. Again, you can find that at ampproject.org. Definitely one to watch. Joe.
Yeah.
The West Coast in the U.S. is contending at what they call another heat dome. I would say this is not something that's happening only in the West Coast of the U.S., but also, I just heard that, plenty of countries in Europe have been experiencing extremely hot weather during very unexpected times. So a prolonged and record heat wave is building over the West, and we're going to see what happens out of that. And finally, some news that shouldn't be news, in my opinion. Nicole Kidman set off a controversy appearing to be fit and strong and perhaps a little more mature on the cover of Perfect magazine. What basically is the story is that she is worked out and she's looking, I guess, also a little bit like her age. And there's something about that doesn't make some people happy. I think the commentary by Yvonne Roberts is something about how this frantic effort to look half your age is frankly demeaning. I don't know how you feel about that, but if we have time, we can have a chat about that. But that's basically the top stories that we've come across.
Yeah. I think her haircut's the problem on the front cover of the magazine. That's imperfect, and it's called Perfect Magazine. Anyway, moving on.
You can't win being a woman. I mean, basically.
Yeah,
right?
good on her for doing that, but people got to comment, so I don't know. They should get on with something else.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's the top stories, but we wanted to dig into 5 more, and there's one that we can get rid of if we run out of time. But the first, of course, is the Pakistan floods that we've seen this week. So as I was going to bed on Saturday night, I caught some of the footage of the floods in Pakistan, and I found it the most horrific climate event I have seen so far. It was so violent, so huge, and so destructive. And I went to bed that night, and obviously it had an impact on me. And when I got up, I went looking for the news, right? So it is the largest body of water ever released. Early coverage focused on it being a glacial lake melt, which is officially called a glacial lake outburst, if you didn't know. But then this really quickly disappeared in the media, and it's only started to come back in now. And sort of towards the end of this week, Vox released an article, and it said Pakistan is home to 7,200 glaciers, and this is more than anywhere outside the poles. Northern Pakistan has more than 3,000 glacial lakes, and 3,000 of them are prone to hazardous glacial lake outburst flooding. So I expected to see this coverage everywhere, and I was looking for it on Sunday. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, many of the other mainstream media, they didn't even talk, there wasn't even there. The BBC did have some coverage, but most of them just nothing there. And there's an article that I shared a few weeks back that the US, the media is basically trying to sugarcoat the climate crisis to its public because people don't want to hear about it because they're getting too upset. But there's some big numbers coming out of Pakistan: 1,350 killed so far, 50 million displaced, and I know a lot of people are saying 33 million, but it's going up. 900,000 livestock dead, or 90%, 3.2 million houses destroyed, with nearly 1 million damaged, more than 40 reservoirs breached, 220 bridges collapsed, 90% of crops damaged, including cotton, which will impact Pakistan and the world, $10 billion lost to the country, to the economy, and 1/3 of the country underwater. And they're expecting it to take 10 years to rebuild. But of course, if there's another glacial lake outburst, that's probably not going to be happening. A lot of different perspectives on this. Have you guys been tracking it? There's a real anger within Pakistan towards the ruling elite. Imran Khan he's not getting a lot of good publicity at the moment. Corruption, is obviously a huge issue around the world. And it's been blamed for this too. Especially so many people are getting approval to build in flood zones, but that's a perspective that people are picking up and hanging their hat on, especially people who are refusing it to consider it as a climate change situation. But when we watched that 150-year-old Love Hotel sort of look like it was just cardboard coming down in seconds, we know that this isn't just impacting homes that are built in, in the river, in the flood plains. This is much, much bigger than that. We know that Pakistan's emissions, contribution globally are very, very low, but, they're obviously being impacted. And, the only thing that we can do if we really want to help Pakistan, apart from donate and help now, is to stop what's causing the problem in the first place. That's how we can help. The other thing that's starting to come up, of course, is people are abandoned, they've got no food, and waterborne diseases are now becoming rampant. So it's a pretty desperate situation. Have you guys been able to watch the footage?
Yeah, I saw it, and I share the same sentiment as you about just the enormity of it was just unbelievable. Because the idea, but what was really really shook me was the footage of a building that looked very much like the place I used to live in, just fall apart, and it just there was just so much water. I mean, and if you haven't seen it, seek it out. And if you're not going to see it, I'm just going to tell you that anything you saw during the coverage of the tsunami, you multiply that by 5 to 10 times, and that's what it was inland. Try and imagine that where there is
He's
really
frozen.
no
He's gone glacier on us.
Escape. Oh well, we have. Oh, Tim, you're frozen on us.
Yeah, you're frozen, not Joe.
Oh, I'm frozen.
Well, it's okay. We all took turns. Anyway, so that's the kind of thing. For me, I think what happens was a story like this is one of those stories which is very hard to put a handle on in the US, where it's so egocentric in terms of what the world's problems are. The handle on this is hard to hold, as in who's the bad guy. What can we do about it? All those things come in, and there is no good angle, I think, for the US. It's one of those things where as soon as it's brought up, they're going to talk about it, and it's going to be someone's got to be blamed for it. You know what I mean? And the blame, I don't know. It's really difficult for me to think about it, especially, and we're talking about media, ironically as well, right? It's because of the way media works now, where you are trying to kind of placate your team or serve your particular team. You don't want to upset your own base, in terms of the stories. So a story like this is upsetting for I think a number of reasons, because it points the finger at everyone. I think if you're Republican, it's your fault. If you're a Democrat, it's your fault. If you're American, it's your fault. And then there's the question of what can you do, and the answer is right now, not very much. I can send some help, but this change that you talk about, I know it's and this is really the problem in terms of what climate change is about. The impact of something that you're going to do today, whatever you're going to do today, is going to happen so far down the road. It needs the kind of vision that the architects of the 9th century had, who had designed a building that would be completed way after their lifetime. It needs that kind of vision, and that kind of vision is rare amongst the average people. And it's something that we do need to have collectively, that kind of vision where we're doing something for a time that we won't see.
Yeah. Planting the tree, right? Jim?
Yeah.
Having some issues there?
Yeah, I dropped off for some reason. Don't know. Anyway, here I am.
All right, so let's move on to the next one, because it links, and this is famine on the rise, food hikes and shortages. So we've talked about the numbers in the past, and Joe, you've sort of referenced some numbers where we've seen improvements over time, but there are now 89.3 million people around the world who've been forced to flee their homes, and nearly half of that, nearly 27.1 million refugees, and half of them obviously are children. There's also another group of people which are called the stateless people, and I've had an opportunity to work with some stateless people, and they have no access to anything, education, medical care. I helped a little boy who'd burnt his arm, and he couldn't get any medical attention for this arm, and if he didn't get it soon, this would be a permanent impairment, and it was because he was stateless, right? So 1 in 88 people on Earth has been forced to flee. But to give the perspective of increases, so in 2021, there were 828 million people affected by hunger, and this is 46 million more than the year earlier, and 150 million more than 2019. So the numbers are definitely going up in the other direction. And it's been relatively unchanged since 2015. You know, the world was progressing. But the people who've been affected by hunger jumped in 2020 and 21 by 9.8%. And there's 2.3 billion people in the world who are moderately or severely food insecure in 2021, which is 350 million more compared to before the outbreak of COVID. So from a numbers perspective, you know, there's a lot more desperation. The United Nations record 345 million people marching to the brink of starvation. And in Politico, the climate crisis is a hunger crisis. And I definitely recommend that. So one of the things that I'm getting frustrated about is the famine is not being covered in the media. You know, in the Horn of Africa, they are suffering the worst famine in 70 years. They've lost their stock. They can't plant. And they're talking about 350 companies who account for more than half the world's food and agricultural revenue. And basically, most of these companies have a presence in the global south. They employ indirectly and directly 23 million people, and they have a disproportionate impact on the food systems. And basically what Politico is saying, they need to make a commitment to providing sustainable livelihoods for farmers, decent employment for workers, and nutritious choices for consumers. These companies, 26 out of 350 have set reduction targets according to the Paris Climate Agreement, and 189 of them have not set deforestation targets. So we're going to talk about it a bit more when we talk about the situation in China, but this famine is going to encircle the globe. Our supermarket shelves are already empty. I don't know if you're seeing that in Singapore, but we're certainly seeing it. The price of goods is doubling. A pineapple used to cost 20 baht, now it's 40 baht. And obviously those people at the bottom of society will always suffer the most. So I think we're at the beginning of a very, very, very challenging time for humanity, and we have to come together and look at how do we solve it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the real problem is about, you know, the bus that we're on, right? I mean, who's driving the bus and who's the rest of the people on the bus? I was you know, and I do trading, and you don't kind of feel that trading is where you will kind of get some kind of insight about what the economy is doing as well. But it's all there; it's all written in the prices, and something that is really coming our way, and it's coming to the Western world as well. And I think less people are aware of that than they are aware of what you just told us about. Is that these shortages are heading out west as well. Water supplies, you know, like where farmers who usually have 15 feet in their reservoir at this time of the year now report that they have 2 feet. And you know, while it does seem like life can go on, it can, but that safety net that used to be there, if you think about this, 15 feet of water versus 2 feet of water, now you're less than 1/7 of where you were normally at this time of the year. You're right on the edge there. And so that's the kind of stuff that is I think it's going to happen in more parts of the world. And I was just thinking about this. Why I talked about the analogy of being on the bus and who's driving the bus. You know, in Singapore, we really don't feel the problem with it. I mean, we get to complain about how things are a little bit more expensive, but at the end of the day, the supermarket shelves here are not empty. We're not in a situation where there is not going to be enough food. We're going to be in a situation here, which is the case at supermarkets right now, where at the end of the day, there's surplus that they have to get rid of. You know, I'm actually I have friends who are involved with the there's a nonprofit that deals with getting all the wasted food and distributing it, right? There is no shortage. They're not in a situation where they have no extra food to give away, and this is the world that we live in, right? So if you think about that, the people who are driving the bus, they go home to their meals. They can complain about the price going up, but they're having the meals. It's just the people who are on the bus as well, who have to come along for the ride, not the perfect kind of metaphor, but that's really the situation. The people up front don't have the same experience as the people at the back, but the people up front are the ones who have an influence on where things are going, and everybody else is unfortunately there for the ride.
Yeah, it's we'll move on to the global economy because this links into it, right? Like one of the things that I'm just trying to make sense of at the moment is the media coverage and the commentary around recession. And Europe, I think, have already said they're in recession, but America is still sort of asking the question: are we going into recession? And I'm just shaking my head, right? So practically every crop on Earth that we need to sustain the global population has been impacted by drought, whether it's 30, 40% loss, 50, 90% loss, right? And, we already started off this year basically losing 20% of a whole bunch of necessities like wheat, sunflower oil, as well as the ingredients for fertilizer due to the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
But then we've had all these other loss on top of it, and it's from drought, from flooding, like the Canadians couldn't plant the wheat crop because it was too wet. In Thailand, they lost 10% of their rice because it was too wet. In California, tomato crops are down. So basically, don't expect your pizza because you can't get the pizza sauce. Olive oil crops, the bumblebees are coming out earlier in the UK, which means they're not what they need to eat isn't available, so they could potentially it's like, and we discussed the famine that it's begun. And I know it's going to encircle the world and people aren't really paying attention to it. The first year is never the worst year because it's the next year and the year after that. We're in the La Nina cycle still. So potentially we've got another year of the same sort of extreme weather patterns, right? Even if people think it's a natural sort of weather sort of pattern. But I don't know. There's going to be so many people who won't be able to afford to eat or even earn a wage. And the farmers are saying that they're not going to replant their crops. So next year is going to be worse, right? Yeah. One example is the cotton industry. So America has already had its crop decimated. In Pakistan, they basically lost the lot. Now, if you think about it, just from that particular industry, right? It's not about not being able to buy your favorite jeans. The farmers will be impacted. The pickers will be impacted. The textile manufacturers that are so important in this part of the world, sewers, tailors, distributors, fashion houses, and all the way through to us, right? And so we're in it now. We are in this cycle that was expected when the climate emergency hit, and people are now saying we are in the climate emergency. And it's like the economists are still, there's one article, the $100 trillion economy in one chart. Are we just going to keep going in the same direction? But in America, they're starting to slow down on hiring. The last 2 months, they've been down. There's an idea called, you'd probably know more about this, leveraged loans are the new canary in the coal mine for a recession. And, for me, we're here. We're in this cycle. And, is it ever going to be better again?
That unfortunately is it is the cycle of life. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but the markets tell you that story over and over and over again. It's going to have to go to a bust before it all falls apart, and then it's rebuilt again. There is a bias. If you look at the way the world works over the last 200, 300 years, there's a bias towards the upside. Now many people think that the human beings are just naturally greedy. We want growth, and all that happens, right? There's actually a chart which I found very interesting, which is a chart of the days that we had winners or rallies versus days when we had losses in the stock market. And if people were to talk about what they think, what they would naturally think is the number of times when you've had a winning day and a losing day, most people would imagine, because of the world we live in, that we are biased towards the upside, right? And they'd be right, but not by the extent that they think they probably think it. It's only about 2 or 3% to one side, as in like it's 53% to 47%, something in that area. So it's a slight bias towards wanting to grow. But the problem is actually about where and how we look at our role in society and who has control of that, right? If the people who are able to solve the problems think about it in terms of solving the problem for everyone, then we are in a good position because we have the greatest bunch of minds. We have the best technology today than ever before. The problem is that many people live in a mindset that is trying to solve the problem for me. I'm trying to solve this for myself. So I'm trying to create a business. I'm going to try and create value so that it solves my problem. And when you have that, what happens is it's I don't blame the 1% for making more money. It's because they're more they're ingenious. They figure out ways to make things work. I mean, look, if it's and being someone who says that, you know, if I wasn't, you know, doing an honest business, I'd be a criminal. I understand that. As in, like, I can understand how an opportunist looks at things, right? In a fire, there is an opportunity. Can I provide firefighting equipment or services or whatever it is? If I'm the person who can do that, I'm the one who can solve this problem, and I can make some money from the whole thing. And it's terrible that I do that, but I'm solving that problem as well, right? So there is this thing about, you know, what we're doing with ourselves. I mean, who are we bringing up? Are we bringing up children that say, we are here? We're here for everyone. We're here for others, or are we here just for ourselves?
Yeah.
You know. So that's the if you I think when you drive, you see a reason why the world is where it is, right? Well, while you're driving, for me in Singapore, I don't see a world where people are giving way to other people and making room for others. It's people who are trying to cut off other people, preventing you from making a move, and you need to do something else, and not really helping the big picture. It's about me rather than us. So it's that problem. It's not just the circumstances. We've always been able to figure out the circumstances. So for me, I've always thought that if the world could be looked after by benevolent dictators, we'd be fine.
An unpopular opinion, but I actually appreciate it just because I've seen how it works. Tim? Yeah. We're just talking about the global economy and just, you know, like, it's like we exist in two worlds at the moment. It really is, you know, there's the reality of what's going on, and then there's this other, you know, politicians, business leaders, economists. It's like they're having a completely different conversation about the reality, and it's only going to get worse. And, you know, Macron's statement about the end of abundance was such an important statement, but so few leaders are doing that. We heard the World Bank say something like similar, like, you know, a few months back, but they're not talking about it.
Yeah. So what Joe said about benevolent dictator, there's merit to that in a sense. The only problem is sustainability of a benevolent dictator after that dictator passes. So there needs to be a structure in place, because usually the benevolent dictator hands down to a malevolent, you know, son or whoever. So so if there's a structure in place to have a benevolent dictatorial government, that could be interesting, unless again it's taken over by something malevolent. The challenge, I guess, is for democratic governments. If people are thinking, like Joe was saying, in terms of me, and what's best for my pocket right now, then governments will respond in order to get elected. Whereas that benevolent dictator will take a position of leadership that sometimes requires unpopular decisions to be made for a greater long-term sustainable good. And the people that are in the position to do that, weirdly enough, are not governments. They're probably either A, the billionaires, or B, the large corporates. The challenge, again, from the large corporates is like a multi-party government system, is that people have a choice to go to another corporate who's going to tell them what they want to hear. and do for them. To take away the subsidy, for example, you charge this for your product while everybody else is charging. Fast fashion becomes fast everything, and then as a result, you go out of business, and the shareholders dump you and everything else. So yeah, I agree with Andrea insofar as there seems to be two worlds happening at the moment, from the but almost two worlds for us as well. It's like we're seeing this world, but we have to play in that world, and then there's a hopelessness from an individual perspective. I think possibly the shift from a community-oriented thinking of we, that Ubuntu sort of idea, the shift of that has been when we've gone from village community to anonymous city life. So they, people move into city centers and become big. No, they don't even know their neighbors down the hall. So, or they hate them all because they're the ones who are directly causing any sort of distress. The smell from their cooking, the noise from their music, the smell from the smoking, whatever it is, they're the ones that are directly causing any discomfort. Therefore, they don't want to know the neighbors. So there is no sense of we, unless that's culturally, I guess, developed and becomes part of an ideology within the country. That becomes a very challenging thing to preserve, and then there becomes a level of maturity and thinking about the world on a larger scale that's required. But people only get to, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs with regards to saving the planet, and at that lowest level is I need to eat, or I need to get away from this flood. And at that particular point, people aren't really thinking about, we need to be making these big decisions. Of course, there'll be anger and blame and everything else, but it's about survival. And it's only when there's a level of self-sufficiency that people can have the comfort, in a sense, to be able to say, this is what I think we need to be doing. And I think it's it's sort of ironic in a sense that Gorbachev has passed away this past week, because in a sense, for him to dismantle what he did or look at reform and change in his party and government and country, he had to go through the existing system to get to the top to be able to change the system. And it's very hard for people who go into any of these systems to get to the top with their values intact. I mean, he's reasonably popular outside of Russia, but not popular within, it seems. Well, certainly with the parties that lead it at the moment. But
the Gorbachev experience, the Gorbachev experience though is a bit different, because what he does, he rose as kind of a moderate, and actually his mind was changed by Ronald Reagan showing him a different side, and he finally got to the point where he got, I think that there's some like a lot of people who go through life with certain beliefs that you're not quite sure about. You get to a point where you go like, there is absolutely no more proof that this belief system that I have is absolutely true. And I think famously, he had that experience, and then did a very brave thing as far as trying to change the world that he lived in, to try and bring people to the other side. And he tried to do it his way, his own brand of things as well, his own special way of doing things. But oh man, it was not easy for him.
Yeah. All right. So global economy, my prediction. Hang on to your hats. We're in for probably the bumpiest ride we've ever seen. Joe?
I'm going to get right behind you and say, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm going to just say something else as well. Don't blame the financial people for making money out of this as well. It's just, what is the obligation of the financial person in all circumstances? I mean, that if you think about this, if I'm a surgeon and I see something wrong, I'm going to try to use my surgical skills to do something with that. The people in the financial industry are going to be facing the market as it is, and it may have been caused by some of their colleagues, some of their peers in governments or what have you, but they're going to make hay of it. And what's going to be very painful about this whole thing, and something that I grappled with when I was younger in a different way. Someone came up to me after 9/11 and said, "What do I think of the markets?" And what I knew fundamentally is the markets historically reset after 90 days. A huge thing happens, 90 days from then it will reset from there. So ergo, you can make a lot of money every time a big disaster happens. And I, at the time, felt I couldn't do it. My reflection on that right now is that, yeah, that was kind of the right story to tell, but at the same time, there was something that could have been done, as in with that. And this is me having just mixed feelings about the whole thing. If you are in the finance industry and something is happening, a calamity is happening, and there's a way to make money from it, it's kind of your obligation to do it. That really is it. What do you do? Do you step aside and say, it's not like it's not going to happen. It's not like there's not going to be money made by somebody else. And if you even feel bad about it, then maybe you're the person who should make that money and do something with it.
Yeah, and I mean, basically, until we change the whole economic system, right, which is what we need to do if we're going to tackle the climate crisis. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not one for making money out of poverty, but then that's why I'm not sitting in millionaires row or billionaires row, because the way I think. But I get you.
I mean, okay, but he's not making money off poverty. He's making money of people deciding to sell at a particular point. He's trading.
If you're making like massive share prices because you're going into commodity trading, right, and you're making massive profits from that, you are profiting off somebody suffering, and that's the people who can't afford to buy food, and that's all over the world in rich countries and poor. So, pharmaceutical companies.
So Joe's argument is make the money and then feed the poor.
It's complicated stuff, and it is not as black and white. I mean, I think if you want to make the big changes, the big differences, you gotta have the ability to do that. And I think, and again, controversially, I guess, but I think Bill Gates is probably the best example of this. Someone who has the ability to make the change, and he's making the change. I think Warren Buffett is also doing that. And by the influence that they have, they've gotten other people on board to try and make that change as well. So it's change. I always feel that change comes in a flavor that not everyone enjoys. People want it to be this particular way, and sometimes it comes in a different way, which people say, oh, it's not enough, it's not fast enough. The world that we have, the problem that we have right now, the big problems that we have right now are literally problems that can't be solved in a day. They cannot be solved in a day. They have to be solved by flicking one little switch at a time that leads to a different switch and leads to a different switch. And that's going to require the kind of influence, the kind of thinking, the kind of connections that the average person is just not going to be able to do. We can't do it.
The problem with those switches is they should have been flicking those switches for the last 30, 40 years. And because they didn't, now there's going to be like this urgency. So if we move into the final sort of focus piece, and this is obviously the heat wave in China, as well as the supply chain issues. So there's a piece in the New Zealand Herald: extreme China heat wave could lead to global chaos and food shortages. And this piece is one of the pieces that sort of really got my attention. I was reading a few months back, the Philippines imports approximately 80%, and I could have the number wrong, but a very large percentage of their food from China. China's just lost a whole bunch of food, so its people will now be facing famine. The country's first priority will be to take care of its own. So countries like the Philippines that have gotten themselves to the point where they're importing so much food from a country that is now going to be scarce of food, what's going to happen to countries like that? And then, I'm talking to people, and the farms, they haven't been planting food in the Philippines. They've been building houses on these massive land up in the mountains and in this land, right? So the farmers are selling their properties to rich developers who are building these properties Now there's going to be no food. And that's the sort of stuff that really, really makes me anxious about where the future's going. But probably the most poignant piece I read was China's supply chain is melting in extreme heat. Whose will be next? And this is in a publication called Protocol. So we saw the Chinese heat wave, and I think it's at an end, but 70 days, nothing like it. Factories shut down, rivers dried up, which meant no hydropower, which meant people couldn't cool themselves. The world had never seen a climate event like it from a drought perspective, and the impact. The businesses impacted, companies like Toyota, the world's largest battery maker, the province that produces major amounts of lithium and polysilicon, and these are both needed for batteries and solar powers, which is obviously important. And there's a whole bunch of manufacturers around them. China's largest automaker and Tesla in Shanghai were impacted because products from the south couldn't get to them. And what this article is really saying is most of the research is basically talking about how can we keep workers productive as the heat increases. And what they're saying is we now need to be paying attention to how increasingly vulnerable supply chains are. And we saw it during COVID for different reasons, but now we're seeing it. Now, no question, China is going to rebuild its country and its supply chain, and they'll do it in a way that Western countries can only dream of, just like they've done everything else with what they're building, right? But I honestly think this is a chance for China to say, let's build back, let's build our supply chain around high-value industries that are really necessary for the future. And let's get rid of all the shit, the cheap plastic toys,
but that's demand-driven.
Okay, so we need to stop the demand, but we actually need to stop the supply as well, right? And they're not going to stop until the demand stops. So one way or another, it's got to stop. These people that have a new color decoration on their Christmas tree every year are not doing a service to the environment. They're just buying more and more crap that's getting washed out into our oceans, right? So I think China's at an amazing point where it could completely rebuild itself into a high-value society and economy, and all of its manufacturing and output is based on that. So, if anyone can do it, China can do it. And I know that most Western countries, the way they think about China is so tainted by Western media, but those of us who are based in Asia have seen a very, very different perspective. But I don't know, did you have a chance to sort of dig into that one? Because I found that a very powerful piece.
I will confess to not reading it, but I will also say this. I think China's further along on that journey than most people think, as in like, the way the West kind of discovered Singapore as being this big jewel of change and changing the world, what have you. China is going to suddenly pop out of the shadows, and you're going to realize that these things are happening. The reason why I'm saying this is that some of those things you talk about are already happening. It's just that China isn't the glowing example that is being held up. It's not very sexy to say an entire country of billions of people, of 1 billion people, have really overshadowed you already. Like if you talk about the average lifestyle of a Chinese person, the middle Chinese family, right? They're doing pretty well. They're doing really well, and they have some really cool stuff. And in terms of technology, either wind power, solar power. I mean, put aside the idea that it was stolen. So what? What's the point if you're the one who holds all the technology that could solve the world's problems, and you don't deploy it, and another culture says, you don't want to use it. Tell you what, I'm just going to borrow it and resell it to the rest of the world. And by the way, we're also going to implement it. And that's what's going to happen. I know for a fact, for instance, in Singapore, there's certain projects right now, and I don't know whether I've come to know about them in a way I'm supposed to share about them. But we are working on those projects where a town will be naturally cool. It's going to be a few degrees lower. Different things like that are going to happen. And I can't imagine that China isn't trying to do that on a super scale. I'm doing a voiceover project right now for a paint that reduces the temperature of surfaces, to a great degree. And if you multiply that and you expand that into an entire city, what happens? And China has the ability to do that. It doesn't have to bother with a small town saying, I don't like the color of this or whatever it is. The entire province is going to get this if it works, and I think China is going to be the big change that no one expects. And when it does finally happen, they're going to be the rich cousins.
Yeah. Although there's a potential that, the bottom half of the country would have to move up to the north, just from a increasing temperatures perspective, because the entire supply chain, it's buckled, it's melting roads, it's like the rivers have dried up, they can't get the boats down, it's phenomenal, like from a
Yep.
not in a great way, but in a like, wow, what has happened over there, right? But I know that as they can do it, they can get back on their feet and faster than anyone. Tim?
Well, there was also drought in Europe, making the waterways unnavigable there too, which means even though the supply that's part of the supply chain is going in and out of Europe, also you can't move vast quantities so quickly. So while other means can move things around, if the ships can't get through with the cargo, you've got a whole new set of problems. How do you solve that, other than lots of buses or trucks or trains? I mean, so it's like, how do you think about climate change now on a macro supply chain, global supply chain level? If water levels are going down, heat is going up. So heat goes up, makes roads and tires and things like that all the more challenging. Rail seems to be the one that has managed to go through significantly hot parts of the world over the last century and a half. So it might be a solution, but that's a fair amount of infrastructure as well that needs to be either renewed or standardized across multiple different standards. It's
so one of
this mind-bogglingness is why I think a lot of people just check out.
Yeah.
And they go, we can't do anything about it, so we may as well put our head in the sand, even though it's getting hotter, and just keep doing what we're doing and try and make as much money as we can at the moment, or do whatever, take care of our family or whatever it is, and just hope someone comes to the party. And weirdly enough, it reminds me of Independence Day, where the aliens were attacking and everything was going terrible. And then finally the Americans worked something out. And then the shots were of all these countries going, finally the Americans have figured it out. Thank God for the Americans. It was just like, it's like, we need the Americans.
Thank God for the Chinese in this case. But one of the things he finished,
whoever holds it.
Yeah. One of the experts says, rather than rely on the types of climate shocks that have happened to us in the past, sort of 1, 2, 3, 5 years, this expert is saying, what if we look at climate models, and actually sort of work out what is the optimal supply chain within the context of what we're actually working with as we move forward into the future. And this is, there's so many of that sort of engineers and civil engineers are asking that question, the 1 in 1,000 year events are now becoming once, twice a year, once every 2 years, that sort of thing. Climate scientists are saying, we weren't expecting this till 2050. Okay, so here we are. So it's time to say, how do we prepare with this? And that's the thing, like in the UK, they haven't built a new reservoir for 30 years. So they're not even remotely prepared for the drought that they're dealing with, right? So the governments, the business leaders, they haven't thought about it. That's the thing that I keep going, like, it feels like practically none of the countries, especially in the Western developed countries, have done anything. Anyway, we are going to make it to an hour. We've got 2 minutes to go. What's keeping you distracted? Who wants to go first?
Well, actually, I was going to go to the remarkable stories that came out of Malaysia around Najib and some of the kind of corruption that went with it. One was a story of the prosecutor. I think someone involved in the prosecution of the case who showed up dead, encased in concrete inside a metal drum, and the cause of death that was accepted by all involved in the investigation was suicide.
Wow.
You
I'm
know,
sorry, I shouldn't be
so
laughing. That's horrific. But what?
it's horrific. And despite all that, Malaysia seems to have been able to pull off something, which led me to think of a different idea, which again, to think of this as controversial, but maybe it's time that we look at sustainable, what is the word now? Sustainable
Judiciary?
corruption. No,
Oh,
sustainable
yeah,
corruption.
absolutely. If we don't tackle corruption,
Yeah.
we're never gonna solve this
Well,
problem.
my
Yeah.
view is corruption isn't going to go away. So let's try and come up with a new way of doing things where it's sustainable. You know what I mean?
Okay.
If
Yeah, I
you're
like
going to
that.
steal some, leave some, steal some, leave some, instead of trying to take
Just
the
make
whole
sure
lot.
the dam gets built, or make sure the
Yeah,
bridge gets built. Don't take
yeah,
so much that the actual people don't suffer. Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. So distractions. Is that it?
For me,
Is that your distraction?
you've been
Joe?
distracted, Joe, by that. What's your distraction been?
My constant distraction is always the same. I'm learning to trade better. I've been speaking to more mentors and trying to learn more, and just getting my game better and better. I'm not much fun as a guy. Unfortunately, that's basically me. Oh, I'll tell you what, I'm watching
that.
I'm watching Reacher on Prime Plus, and that is. It's everything the Tom Cruise movies weren't, because if you know that the character Jack Reacher
He's
is supposed
tall,
to be
right?
this. Well, he's 6'5". Tom Cruise is not. He's huge, muscle bound. Tom Cruise, well, maybe somewhat, but it's an interesting watch. I don't completely agree with the character, but I'm sort of getting a sense of what
That's your
is
escape.
what he's all about. It's very interesting.
Tim?
Well, I've just been immersed in studies, I'm afraid. So I have piles of books, assignments due, and but I'm on a 2-week break as of now, which feels like, it reminds me of when I went to Everest, where we had break days in the trek. And I thought to myself, a break day is sitting around, sleeping, recovering. But no, it was climbing a mountain to get altitude exposure and then coming back down again. So it wasn't a break at all. And that's exactly what this break is. It's catch up on readings, try and pre-read to get ahead a little bit so that I don't slip immediately, and trying to catch up on stuff. So it's been relentless, but fascinating, and just absolutely loving studying. So it's
Good
good.
on you. All right, so one show that I would definitely recommend, it's called Halftime on Netflix, and it's a feature on J-Lo, and it's a fascinating piece. And she's a woman who has been undervalued her entire life, and it sort of gives the perspective of how her self-worth was low throughout her career, how she believed all the external sort of ideas about who she was and what her talents were. But I got to tell you, one of the things that just remarkable about her is her work ethic. When she's bringing together the halftime show for the Super Bowl, the creative process, the epiphanies, the inspiration, I found it incredibly inspiring. But also it's a story about another woman who's had to work so much harder to be recognized for who she is and what she brings to the world. And there's a burden for women who have to carry that. So I really recommend that everyone watches it, male and female. I think men need to watch female stuff too, because, very powerful. There you go. We are 2 minutes over. What do you reckon, guys?
I think we did pretty all right. I have so many things I still want to say, but I'm going to stop.
Yeah. So, to our friends who've been sort of joining us for a while, and I know people watch it at different times and on the rerun or on the podcast, let us know. Does this work? Is this a good idea? Do you guys feel good about it? Feels a bit too quick, but that's okay.
Yeah, look, I think for the purposes of giving people the information and where to find it, I think it's good. I think it's okay. I think we'll get better. I think we'll get better with the ramblings.
Yeah, we need a fourth person to share the links. I can't do that and do this at the same time, so I stopped sharing the links. But yeah, all right. Have a great weekend, everyone. It's really good to see you. It's good to be back. Nice to see you guys.
It is good to be back.
Yeah.
See you all.
All right.
See you all.
Bye.
Bye.